Okay, cool. Yeah, I will eat this up. I don't care. Hey y'all, my name is Nat. I hope you're having a terrific day today. And for this video, we are going to be doing my July wrap up. Alright, before we get to anything bookish, make sure to hit like and subscribe down below, as well as tell me in the comments, how many books did you read in July? I ask because this was my most successful reading month ever. A large majority of that is because I tried to do that 10K and 10 days challenge. I vlogged it. I'll put a link to it in the cards up above. Definitely check it out. It's a little bit of madness if I'm being honest. Because of that, I read so much. Honestly, we're not talking about all those books. No. This is me reminding you right now, I'm only going to be talking about books that I didn't read for other specific videos, like my Star Wars reading vlog. If you're interested in any of those, please check them out for full reviews of the books because they're not going to be talked about here. I don't want to double up personally. I don't want y'all to get tired of me talking about the same books 20 million times. Even so, we still got a good number to talk about today. But first off, let's go over my stats. So I read 24 books in July. Insanity. Across those 24 books, 2,433 of those pages I read with my eyeballs. My usual page breakdown that I do, including audiobook hours. I was very bad about tracking that this month. However, for audiobook hours, I listened to 145 hours. My average rating for the month was 4.02 stars, and unfortunately, I did have one DNF. One DNF? Two DNFs. I had two DNFs. Looking at my genres, I read 2 contemporary novels, I read 3 fantasies, 1 graphic novel, 3 horror, 4 manga, 2 mysteries, 2 nonfiction, 3 romance, 3 sci-fi, and 1 thriller. I really covered the board when it came to genres. For my series stats, I did start into 4 series, unfortunately. However, I continued with 8 different installments. I did finish 1 series as well, so that's pretty solid. And then for the little goals I keep for myself, I did read a book that was over 450 pages. I did read a nonfiction book, finally, and then I also read a comic or manga. We did solid across the board this month. Really just killed it. August is not going the same. I can say that right now. I think it's going to be easiest for me if I go through these in genre order, especially when we get to like some of the series. That will definitely help out. So starting at the top, I finally finished reading Queer Body Power by Denis. I started this in June. Queer Body Power, Pride Month. It got set down and I just didn't return to it for quite some time because I was prioritizing a lot of other books. That's not to say I wasn't enjoying this. Actually, I really found this very interesting, a very cathartic read. This feels like a collection between a memoir, a self-help book, and a collection of essays in which the author is kind of going through and unpacking how they've learned to reevaluate society's view of their body and their feelings about their body, how views of your body change based on your sexuality or your gender representation. The author also interviewed other queer influencers and kind of had little anecdotes from them as well. Then there's little bits of advice that Denis slides in that were very helpful for them in healing when it came to their body issues. Again, I really enjoyed this. It had a lot of very cool facts, and the author really did their best to discuss the many different topics that tie into body image, how your sexuality can tie into those, the relationships you have with food, with fashion. Again, just like this was a really great read for me, even though it did take me over a month to read it. I fully was invested every time I picked this up. I did go through and annotate it as I was reading. This was a solid 5 stars. I'm so glad I asked Josh to buy me a copy of this because it was so good. I really enjoyed this one. For my other nonfiction book I read this month was In the Heart of the Sea by Nathaniel Philbrick, The Tragedy of the Whale Ship 𝗖cie. So this was actually the pick for my friend Molly to my 12 Recs by 12 Friends. Molly loves shipwreck books, and I'm like the only one of our friend group who also reads these sorts of nonfiction. I believe this one's her favorite, and it was really interesting. So the Tragedy of the Whale Ship 𝗖cie is actually the basis for the final scene in Moby Dick. The author put a lot of research into this. He really took the time to explain like what the whaling industry was like, what life in Nantucket at this time was like, and then combines multiple different accounts of people who survived from this tragedy to explain how their ship was attacked by a whale and then how they ended up surviving on these smaller whale ships after the fact. Initially, I wouldn't have said this was really my sort of nonfiction, but honestly, after finishing it, I am really intrigued to try out similar stories because this was very fascinating. I learned a lot about mariner life, about whaling at this time. It was both inspiring, and horrifying. As I said, you can tell that the author put a lot of research into this, and I think he did a really great job of weaving it into almost more of a narrative style, but occasionally he will stray away and give you little bits of extra information that will tie back to whatever these men are experiencing at this point in the story. For example, he references a starvation study to kind of see what these people were actually dealing with, and then also other maritime disaster stories. So I might have found a new niche interest. I did really enjoy this. I read it quite quickly. Solid 5 stars. Thanks, Mal. I really liked this. I guess next let's just talk about the manga, because there's a stack of them all together at once. So I read volumes 14 through 17 of Soul Eater by Atsushi ohkubo. So this is one of my favorite animes ever, and I've been reading through the manga for the first time, and I'm really enjoying it. The manga actually continues past where the anime stops. The events going on here, I was in for the freaking ride. So in this universe, there are people who are either meisters or weapons. We follow 3 teams who go to a school where they are trying to become better, and once they eventually take 99 souls and 1 witch's soul, the weapon will become a death weapon and the meister a death meister. That means they work for Lord Death himself, a Shinigami. At this point, we are following them as they are fighting against this really big bad, and it is crazy. Like, there is so much action going on here. There are so many fantastic fight scenes, and these two, I loved it. It was flipping pages as fast as possible. There's some awesome art in these as well when it comes to the fight scenes. Fight scenes in manga are always very hit or miss for me, because it's either like I can totally watch this unfold in my head, or I have no idea what's going on and I'm just jumping panel to panel, and this definitely fell in the former, thankfully. And these two, we are continuing to follow our main characters after the fact and kind of seeing how they have grown after going through all of the wildness of the prior battles. But there is another enemy that is still out there that they have to track down. There's a friend in trouble that they need to save, and like, my library didn't have volume 18, so I had to order it myself, and I can't freaking wait to continue reading it. I'm so excited. These two were 4.5 stars because, again, I just was freaking having the best time of my life with them. These two are more 4 stars because they don't live up quite to the excitement of the prior 2. So much fun. I love this one. Sure, why not? Let's go with the thriller. So I read The Only One Left by Rowley. This was actually my TBR jar prompt for last month. So glad I finally got around to this. Riley Sager and I have had a very hit or miss relationship, and with this one, I think it was a hit. We're following this main character who is a home health aide, went through something a little suspicious, and has just recently been put back on the job. She is given this one patient that really nobody else wants to work with, which is Lenora? Correct, who is very much like a Lizzie Borden sort of character. Everybody in this town believes she offed her family, but she suffered from many strokes and now she can't communicate. She really only has movement of one hand, but she decides to start typing out her story for her home healthcare aide to explain the real things that happened that night. As Sager does, this had twist after twist in the end. I think I updated my last time reading this with like 20 minutes left on the audiobook in my 10K vlog, thinking like, oh, you know, I know everything that's going on here. No, there was more after that. There were more twists that went on. It was crazy, but that's also like exactly what I expect from this author. I do have like logical issues with. I've learned I'm a very logic-based reader, but even so, I was just blasting through this so quickly that it was kind of hard for me to even care because I was just so desperate for those answers. And once he was giving them to me, I was like, okay, cool. Yeah, I will eat this up. I don't care. I just want to know what happens next. One aspect of the plot that I was a little questionable on because it was like, that seems so convenient. In the end, this came out to about 4 stars. I think this is the book that saved Sager for me. I'm definitely going to try his newest one, even if it has been having mixed reviews. I feel like he just is sort of a divisive thriller author across the board now. And then by extension, I guess we can go ahead and talk about the mystery, which was The Paris Apartment by Lucy Foley. This was the pick from my friend Kat for my 12 Recs by 12 Friends. We are following this young woman who ran away from home in Britain after some shady crap went down, and she is trying to stay with her brother in Paris, but once she arrives at his apartment, he is gone. She starts to interview the different people in this apartment building and trying to figure out what happened to her brother. If I'm being completely honest, this is an author I've just personally never had really any interest in. I only read this because Kat picked it for me, and this is the one I've heard the most mixed things on. It kind of confirmed that I just don't really want to pick up anything more from this author. I think if you can handle unlikable characters that you can't root for, you'll enjoy this. It was a fun ride, I guess I'll admit. God, I hated everybody. I did think one reveal pleasantly surprised me and caught me off guard, but most of this I was pretty much expecting. I didn't feel like I got any real payoff in the end, which just sort of frustrated me. I also feel like some of the bigger elements of the plot have just been done better in other stories, so I couldn't help comparing this to those other books. Meaning once I started comparing it, this one just felt so lackluster. I guess I kind of liked the main character and her gumption, but like baby girl also made a lot of dumb decisions that I just couldn't understand how she was actually getting answers, because she was going about some of these situations in like the dumbest way possible. I could not believe she dared to call what she was doing investigating, because no, she was more like bumbling around and just falling into situations that somebody else would save her or somebody would finally reveal what she needed to know. This was 2.5 stars. I probably would have DNF'd it if I wasn't rating it for that 10K challenge, but I wanted to get my pages. Let's stick with the unsettling stories and go with Horror Movie by Paul Tremblay, which was either the Full Moon Book Club pick or it was the Bloody Read for Jan's Discord. I don't remember which, but this was my first Paul Tremblay, and I went into this book knowing his stuff is weird. That's what I always hear people talking about when it comes to Tremblay's writing, is it's weird and strange and divisive, which so far it seems this book is also falling into those categories. I don't think this quite hit like the surrealism of a wad that I tend to enjoy, but it was pretty odd. We're following this man who was a part of a team that made this very small cult horror movie in like the 80s, I think. And he is now the only survivor of the original cast, the original crew. And he ends up working with some people who are trying to revamp this movie. But as the story continues, we see his past and his present slowly starting to mix together. I actually really enjoyed this. I think this book taught me that I like horror books about horror movies, or like filming at some haunted or cursed place. It did take me a little while to get invested into the story because we're seeing through the eyes of our narrator, who is unnamed. Initially doesn't really have much of a personality, but as things unfold around his character and as we learn more about the backstory with the original movie, I got hooked in. The more we saw of the filming process and the impact that had on him, the more enthralled I was, but also the more unsettled. I listened to the audiobook of this one, which I highly recommend because it is very well produced. There's a full cast and there's a little background noises. Whenever they're doing a table reading, you can hear the script flipping. You'll hear the actors kind of mess up their lines and go back to correct it. It was very well done. I did occasionally have an issue with the alternating timelines, but I also think, again, that was sort of part of the point, is that the two start to blend together. I never felt lost. I just felt unsure and sort of on uneven ground, which I think added to the unsettled feeling that was going on throughout the entire book. However, most of the characters were completely forgettable. I think the experience of reading this book was so strong though, and that's why I enjoyed it as much as I did. But it was eerie, it was fast-paced. It made me so intrigued about like other cursed horror movies. So this also just kind of got me really excited to watch some more horror movies in the fall time. Like I said, I really enjoyed the experience of this one. Solid 4 stars. Sticking with horror, but more gothic horror, was The Haunting of Velkwood by Gwendolyn Kiste. I think this one was the Full Moon Book Club, and Horror Movie was the Bloody Read. So this one is following this woman who grew up in a small town where eventually everybody there turned into ghosts. It became a ghost town. And she has been approached by somebody who is looking to research this town and asks her to return. She and 2 of her best friends were the only ones who ever left. Honestly, I was not sure what to expect going into this book, but I actually really liked it. This is one of those books where I think the author wove the themes going on into this like very gothic, horrific story so well. Once we actually visit Velkwood, it's just this constant feeling of something's not right. Kind of like with Horror Movie, where you're just consistently unsettled and there's a shiver going down your spine, there's goosebumps that you can't explain. That's how this felt. There were also many mysterious elements of the plot that really kept me invested. Not only what happened to this town, why are they trapped like this, but also how did these 3 friends escape and what has happened to cause their friendship to deteriorate over. Again, I really loved the themes that were explored in this book and how the author revealed them as the plot continued. I think the most basic elements of the story, where a woman is returning to her small town that she ran away from, it has been done a million times, but everything else around this was just very unique. Again, it's more gothic, like societal horrors that are going on. The more you learn about the history of this town and what these girls experienced at the time, the more that creepy atmosphere grew and just started to overtake you. I didn't absolutely love the characters, unfortunately, and I do think that's really the only letdown I had with this book. I do wish it was longer so we would have more time with Talitha and Brett to really explore more of the nuances and their relationship and convince me of what the author does at the end, because there's so much between them that is left unsaid. But I wish Talitha at the very least would have like acknowledged it in her mind, and we never really even see that. I wanted that to be dived into more. But again, happily surprised. This was a solid 4-star. I didn't know what to expect, but it actually went really well. Fantasy. Let's start with this baby. So one of the books I DNF'd this month was Blood Heir by Ilona Andrews. So this is a part of a TBR challenge that I'm doing where I'm going to be attending this romance book tea, and I'm reading the highest rated book from every single one of the authors that will be there. It's going to be on October 20th. If you are in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, it's open to the public. I'll put information for it in the description down below, but I am doing a little short form review for every one of the books I read. However, this one is marked as the first in a series, the Aurelia Writer series, but it is also set in the same universe as these authors' Kate Daniels world, which I was told you could read this as its own and still understand everything, but I don't think you can really enjoy it, because I read the first 70 pages of this and everything just felt like it was a reference to events of the prior books in the Kate Daniels world. It didn't feel like plot was really developing here. It was just kind of extending off of the prior books. It didn't really work out, unfortunately, but I think that's, again, just because of the circumstances, so I ended up picking up a different book instead. But I did manage to finish out the Extraordinary series by TJ Klune with Heatwave. This is just so much freaking fun. We're continuing to follow Nicholas Bell, who's obsessed with superheroes and wants to be one himself. This was just a very fun end to the series. There was a reveal that took place in the second book that left me questioning whether or not I was going to enjoy how this was going to develop in this last one, but I actually think Klune did a really solid job of laying the groundwork for that, but then twisting it in a way that just you're not expecting. It did allow for more talk about grief, which is kind of a very prevalent topic in this series because Nick's mom died prior to the start of the first book. And Klune just writes that so well. It just feels like he's slowly squeezing his hand around your heart. Being a superhero series, of course, it's hard not to get a comic book feeling from this, but I love that about it. There's lots of action going on here. There's a mystery that's sort of been building throughout all of the series, and I think it actually was handled so well to finish things out here. There was just a really solid reveal, and then the twist that went on with how the characters handled it was great. The highlight, once again though, is just the little found family that's been built up here and we've got to spend so much time with. I love that there's not a breakdown between the teenagers and their parents. Their parents are actually so prevalent in this story. All of the characters' dads make their own little dad squad, and it's the funniest and like most wholesome thing ever. There was a bit more time with Nick and his love interest Seth as a couple, which was something I was missing in the prior book. In fact, this one kind of starts to jump more into like new adult, which does make sense as they're gearing up to go to college. And I thought the discussions that were going on here when it came to their relationship, but also growing up, felt very hopeful, but also just really realistic. Especially loved the epilogue chapter, which is set a few years in the future. Oh my God. It was so freaking fun. This knocked it out of the park again. Not even a little bit surprised. One of my favorite authors. Big ol' 5 stars. And then finally, oh my God, it feels like I read this book so long ago. Illuminae by Amie, Kaufman, and Kristoff, which was my pick from my friend Allie for my 12 Recs by 12 Friends. I got all 3 of my in real life friends from that list done this month. So this is a sci-fi story in which we're following these 2 teenagers who used to date, but at the start of this book, their planet is invaded and they end up escaping to these ships, and once on the ships they're having to deal with even more crap, namely a AI that is suddenly trying to kill them and a space virus that is also trying to kill them, plus this Federation evil government sort of thingy, all told in multimedia format, which is very cool. The audiobook, very well produced, but I do think if you listen to the audiobook, get a physical copy so you can flip through photos and stuff. Because of that setup, it did take me a little bit to get invested into the story, as I'm a big fan of exposition and you can't really do exposition in multimedia, at least not quickly. But once I did grasp on to the layout of the story, the world that we're supposed to be seeing, I was in. I was so hooked. And then also when I got a real grasp of the dynamic between Katie and Ezra, I really enjoyed seeing their interactions. Again, the multimedia element is just so cleverly done in how the authors utilize different pieces to continue the story and showcase things through other people's perspectives. Really creative, really clever. Then once the action starts setting up, I was just on the edge of my seat. I literally didn't stop reading for the last 300 pages. I just blasted through. There was a lot going on in this book, but I also think the authors did a pretty solid job of like balancing each of these different bads that they're having to handle at the same time. There were a few twists and turns that I really enjoyed, and I also really appreciated the dedication we see from Katie. She's on the younger side. She's very emotionally driven. She's just determined to do what she believes is right. And, you know, the adults don't always necessarily agree, but that doesn't matter to her. She's gonna get it done. I also really enjoyed the AI angle of this, where Aiden is almost... I can't get into too many specifics because I'll be broaching spoiler territory, but I just think it was very cool how they utilized him in like this really unsettling and interesting way. I also enjoyed him. Plus there's a final reveal at the end of this book that does have me intrigued for the next one. I have checked it out. I just haven't gotten around to reading it yet, but I am planning to continue on with this series. They're just really big. Okay, we got 2 left. Let's go with a graphic novel, because it's short and sweet. I read Bingo Love by T. Franklin, which is this cute little story where we're following these 2 women who grew up in the 50s and realized they had romantic feelings for each other, but unfortunately were then forced to separate. And we're seeing them when they have reconnected about 40 years in the future. It was a really sweet little book, honestly. I read it pretty quickly. It was another carryover from June. I think the artwork that was done was really great. I liked seeing the complicated feelings that these main characters had in their relationship, but also the people around them were having about their relationship. However, I wanted more of those, and that's kind of really what this just boiled down to, of why it came out to 4 stars, was I wanted more. I wanted this to be a little longer, maybe even the start of a series, but it was a very cute, fast read. Finally, I finished out The Guncle by Stephen Rowley. My friend Kat actually annotated this one for me, and I realized upon reading her annotations that when I suggested it, I don't think I explained to her that grief is one of the more prominent themes of the story, as we are following our main character Patrick, whose best friend and his brother's wife has just recently passed. Brother has not been handling it well and ends up checking himself into rehab, but his brother also asks that he take care of his 2 young children. So Patrick ends up taking Maisie and Grant home with him, and he is not really used to kids, which is very obvious at the start, but they're just stumbling along, and he is doing his best, improving his relationship with them, helping them through their grief, which then by extension helps him through his own grief. Such a sweet, wholesome, funny book that had some really heart-wrenching moments, some very tear-inducing scenes. By the end of this, I just wanted to go give all of my nibblings a big ol' hug. It was a wonderful time. I am on the wait list for the second one. I'm so excited to see a little bit more grown-up Grant and Maisie and see how their relationship with Patrick has improved, because I think the next one is at like 10 years in the future. I can't wait. This was just like everything I love in a story. Big ol' 5 stars. Adorable. So freaking cute. On that note, that is it for today, y'all. Thank you so much for coming to my channel. I really appreciate it. Make sure to hit like and subscribe down below. If you made it all the way to the end of this video, leave me a sun emoji in the comments. I have all my socials, as well as a few ways you can support me, linked in the description. I come out with videos on Monday and Friday, but until then, I hope you continue to have a terrific day. Love you, bye!